We invoked the Emergencies Act after we received advice from law enforcement. The advice we received was to invoke the Emergencies Act. Look, I don't want to speak for every last serving member of law enforcement, but there was a very strong consensus that we needed to invoke the Act. We invoked the Act because it was the advice of nonpartisan professional law enforcement. The advice that we were getting was that that law enforcement needed the Emergencies Act. It was only after we got advice from law enforcement that we invoked the Emergencies Act. And that advice came from very experienced law enforcement. We had to invoke the Emergencies Act, and we did so on the basis of nonpartisan professional advice from law enforcement. And that was the advice that we were receiving from law enforcement, and one of the main reasons why we invoked the Emergencies Act. We got the advice from our law enforcement that we'd met the threshold. They then came to their judgment, as you say, and thereafter, we came to ours on the basis of the advice that we were getting from law enforcement.
Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember that the Ambassador Bridge and Coutts Alberta crossings were cleared before the Emergency Act was invoked. Right. The Act was not needed to clear the border blockades. Police were well equipped to take care of this with all of their existing laws and powers. So what then was the national security threat that met the extraordinarily high threshold needed to invoke this Act? Is there something they're not telling us, or was the Prime Minister trying to cover up for his incompetent management of the protest, Mr. Speaker?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
When illegal blockades hurt workers and endangered public safety, police were clear that they needed tools not held by any federal, provincial, or territorial law. It was only after we got advice from law enforcement that we invoked the Emergencies Act. The Canadian Policing Association, Canadian and Ontario Associations of Chiefs of Police all agreed this is how the legislation should be used for emergencies. We've now announced the independent inquiry to examine the circumstances that led to the declaration and the measures taken in response. I know we all look forward to Justice Rouleau's work.
Honourable Member for Kildone and St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, the protest organizers are being held accountable in courts as we speak, but this inquiry is to ensure the government is being held accountable.
That's right.
Invoking an act with the power to override charter rights is dangerous, so the purpose of the inquiry is to tell the public whether the threshold needed to invoke the act was in fact met. But the Liberal government has not made a convincing argument, meaning the threshold remains in serious doubt. So either they're hiding something or they're covering up for incompetence. Will the Prime Minister waive cabinet confidence and let Canadians know the true story?
Yeah, the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, when we invoke the Emergencies Act in a restrained and limited way, we also committed to the full transparency that goes with the invocation of these hours, whether it's a parliamentary committee that has been examining the issue or whether it is a full public inquiry that will be transparent and have the power to understand the circumstances and the use of the Emergencies Act. That is the kind of thing that everyone should look forward to.
Commissioner Lucki, we've heard multiple times from ministers and others that the Emergency Act and the tools provided were specifically requested by police leadership. As a law enforcement agency with primacy for national security, did you ask the government or representatives for the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
No, there was never a question of requesting the Emergency Act. There was a question.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm sorry. So you never asked for it. Do you know of any other police leadership that asked specifically the government for the invocation?
No, we actually reached out to various police agencies when there was talk about some of the authorities within that they were proposing, and of course we were consulted because we were the ones who would be using those authorities. So we were consulted to see if they would be of any use to police in the context of the Freedom Convoy.
Mentored me and believed in me, and who have forged the path to this very special day.